What do you do when a man tries to starve your entire village and the law backs him? Well, this tiny little town in Ireland found a way to fight back. It's 1880, Ireland is starving, and the land is owned by English landlords, and none of them may even stepped on Irish soil. And then one day, a local man who works for one of those landlords demanded the impossible, a full season's rent. Can you imagine? For people who already lost everything on failed crops. And he says to them, if you can't pay it, he's evicting you. People start begging, but he's just shrugging. And then instead of lashing out, the town do something people never expected. They start speaking to him. No greetings, no service, no labor. The postman stops giving him his post. The butcher stops giving him his meat. The shops stop taking his money. And no one will harvest his crops. Even the church stops talking to him. He's not attacked, just erased. Boop. And eventually the British government got involved and they sent over 50 police for a town that never laid a hand on him. So what happens to a man who becomes too hated to exist? First it seemed like a stubborn town, but then the silence spread and newspapers started to pick it up. Writers called it genius, politicians called it dangerous. And he fled, broke and disgraced. But it was too late. The word had already spread like wildfire, and before you know it, his name was in every headline, but not as a victim, as a verb. His name, Charles Cunningham Boycott, and that's how the word boycott was formed. Not from a war, but from an Irish village that simply said no. Follow if you're done watching passively, we decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs. John Lennon took his poster, used his words in one of the best-selling albums in UK history, and the man behind it erased. The year is 1810. A boy was born in Norwich. He was orphaned young, no inheritance, no connection, but by the age of 11, he started performing in the circus. And he was bad, an equestrian, acrobat, tightrope, and the crowd loved him. And he studied the business too, so by the time he was 30, my man was running things. So now he owned it all and he was touring the country. Circus Royal is what he called it. He had royal audiences, working class fans, the first black circus owner in Britain, maybe the world. But it wasn't just his talent, it was marketing, posters, spectacle, and in 1843, he printed a poster for a show in Leeds, and over 100 years later, John Lennon reads it word for word. So how did his words end up on Sgt. Pepper, but his name didn't? See, John Lennon lifted the copy, the title, the acts, the absurd flair, straight from the poster. The song, being from the benefit of Mr. Kite, known for his chaos, color, and creativity. But John Lennon didn't imagine the vibe, he borrowed it. He sampled from the circus and made it iconic, and history gave credit to the Beatles, but not the man who made it first. His name, William Darby, but the world knew him as Pablo Fanque. A pioneer, a master showman, a name they should have sung louder. Follow if you're done watching passively, we decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs. A hidden tunnel, a secret client list, and a scandal so explosive, it nearly took down the monarchy. Okay, the year is 1889, and in the heart of London, a small house on Cleveland Street hides a second business underground. I mean, literally underground. A hidden tunnel leads from the cellar to a neighboring address. No noise, no sign, but inside, a ring of working class boys hired as telegraph messengers. But they ain't what they was doing inside. And their clients, not the public, the powerful. Hidden men with high titles and deep secrets. And it was all going well for them until one boy got caught stealing and started talking. The boy's arrest should have been routine, but once he mentioned Cleveland Street, the police got nervous. He said that the house had regular visitors, military officers, aristocrats, even someone with royal connections. So this little office boy was getting paid for more than just running errands. And then suddenly, this wasn't petty theft anymore. This was a threat to the crown. So Scotland Yard had a choice here. Investigate fully or cover it up. Which one do you think they chose? They chose option 3. Now let me explain. So at first the police did investigate fully. They arrested the brothel owner, they questioned the boys, but the moment names like Lord Euston and Prince Albert Victor came up, things started to slow down. Files went missing, witnesses changed their stories, and when the key suspects fled to France, the police just let them go. No pursuit, no warrants, no justice. Scotland Yard didn't fully investigate, but they didn't cover it up either. They staged a show of justice, just enough to protect the powerful. The name of the 15-year-old telegraph boy? Charles Thomas Swinscoe. Because of his confession, the scandal exploded. The boy took the fall for it, whilst the powerful just slipped away. Follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs. Two black men from East London became the UK's first self-made millionaires, yet no one says their names. Picture this, East London, 1960s, one ran a barber shop, the other one worked in marketing. They kept crossing paths at community events. They realized they had the same goals and the same frustrations. There were no products on the shelves that worked for black women, so they started to sell their own door to door. No storefront, just a suitcase, samples and trust. And then when demand exploded, they opened up their own shop near Ridley Road Market, and that's when everything just started to take off. They packed boxes by hand, delivered to salons, organized beauty shows, sponsored pageants. They weren't just surviving, they were taking over. And that's when the calls came in. Major distributions wanted in. But here's the thing, if they were that successful, then how did they vanish? See, they went from 2 suitcases to outselling every major brand in the country. They had all their products in every salon and every household. They built their company to become a £1 million empire. But when white conglomerates saw that the market was booming, they stepped in, underpriced, overmarketed. And you've probably heard of them and probably used them too. Dark and Lovely, originally black owned, but acquired in the late 90s by giants like L'Oreal and Revlon, and then other brands all started flooding the shelves with cheaper options. These two businessmen pushed out of their own industry, and then the distribution partner folded, and so did the company. Their names, Len Dyke and Dudley Dydon, the founders of Dyke and Dydon, the original black kings of black British beauty. Follow if you're done watching passively or buying passively. We decode the myth and we don't clap for crumbs. What do you do when you're chained, watched and banned from fighting back? You turn your daytime party into a training ground. Brazil, 1500s, and Portuguese ships have unloaded human cargo. Millions of enslaved Africans, stripped of language, watched every hour, and rebellion, punishable by. But inside the sugar plantations, something was brewing, and they weren't tea. You see, bodies were twisting, feet were sweeping, hands were clapping, and to an outsider, it just looked like rhythm. But that rhythm was a disguise. They trained in circles. One played the fool, the other one attacked. They dodged like dancers, kicked like fighters, no weapons, just music and motion. And the masters, I hate that word, they didn't see the threat because it didn't look like violence. To them, they were thinking, oh, these people can dance. So how did this martial art go from secret daytime parties to gyms and studios all around the world? Well, at first they passed it down in secret. Even after slavery, it was still banned. Too dangerous, too black, too free. But one master came and gave it structure. Clean uniform, repetition, respect, and he took it to the president and called it culture. And suddenly, what was once criminal became folklore. And by the time Eddie Gordo showed up in Tekken in '97, the world was finally ready to watch the fight and call it art. The martial art, capoeira, born from resistance, disguised as dance, refined as survival, and make no mistakes, this was never just movement. It was a revolution with rhythm. Follow if you're done watching passively, we decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs. This woman made UK film history, and they banned it after one broadcast. So it's 1960s Newcastle, and a girl is living alone with her widowed mom after fleeing the civil war in Nigeria. As hard as it was, she learned to adapt, code switch, disappear, but in private, she watches, sketches, and starts to see the world through a camera lens, and them stories in her head, they ain't trying to keep still. She needs to get those ideas out, so she starts making short films about memory, violence, survival, nothing too polished, but raw and real. And then one day she writes something different, not set in the past, not set in the present, but in the future, a Britain on fire. And she's not trying to predict the future, she's trying to warn it. But when the film came out, why did broadcasters treat it like a threat? She showed Britain as a militarized racist state, police with batons, children with guns, mothers being hunted down like criminals. They aired it once, then they locked that right off. The networks called it too dangerous. They didn't want questions, they didn't want riots, and they definitely didn't want a woman showing that kind of future. Her name, Ngozi Onwara, and the film, Welcome to the Terror Zone. The first sci-fi feature film to ever be directed by a British woman was aired once in 1995 and then vanished, but still made history. For all of you done watching passively, we decode the myth and we don't clap for crumbs. One protest, one target, one city in chaos. The headlines didn't match the whispers, but the true story hid in plain sight. It starts with this one man. His name, Guy Reed Bailey. He applies for a job, confident, qualified, calm, but he doesn't just get rejected. He gets told, nah, don't even bother, mate. No sugarcoating, just you won't be considered. And not because of his experience, because of his skin. So he goes and tells his friends. Then another man applies, then another. Each man, black or Asian, each one refused. No callbacks, just silence. And every white applicant, no problem. And a pattern forms fast. It turns out that the local union, overwhelmingly white, had drawn a line. If one of them gets hired, we'll strike. That was the deal. The company didn't argue, they complied, and the public, none the wiser. Then, resistance! A youth worker by the name of Paul Stevenson called for a boycott.
Thank you for your services.
They disrupted, they organized, until the revenue started to bleed. And you know that's where it hurts. Noise turns into headlines, national attentions, public debates, political pressure, until Harold Wilson speaks out and condemns the company's racism. And then finally, as if it should have taken this long, the company folds. They quietly change the policy and start hiring people who aren't white, and history doesn't even blink. The job, bus driver. The city, Bristol. The company, Bristol Omnibus. The year, 1963. The story, 100% true. Follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs. MI5 feared that Britain could get their own Malcolm X, except this time, it was a woman. She arrived in the UK politically sharp and completely unwelcome. America had already banned her, but the UK said they'll let her in and keep an eye on her. She wanted peace, but knew that culture was powerful. The year before, race riots had rocked West London and the police done nothing. So she planned a night of culture, dancing, music, poetry, resistance, you know the thing, all under one roof. She knew that this West London town needed healing and thought that rhythm was the cure. But what if that night of culture had some uninvited guests? You see, behind the scenes, MI5 had opened up a file. A special branch flagged the event. Notes were made, her contacts tracked, all for this Caribbean party in a rented town hall. And the night went ahead. Music, laughter, pack old. And MI5 didn't just watch from afar, they sent people in, undercover, blending in. They were taking notes on Joy like it was a threat, but the rhythm was moving faster than surveillance ever could. They couldn't stop it. They might still be trying to, but they still haven't. Her name, Claudia Jones. The event, Notting Hill Carnival. The surveillance, real. And the story, 100% true. Follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth and we don't clap for crumbs. A black man joined the Royal Navy, left behind a legacy no one saw coming, and history tried to forget. Queen Charlotte was the most heavily armed ship in the Royal Navy, and in 1815, a name appeared on the cruise ship, William Brown, a landsman from Grenada. No family mentioned, no past records, just a name, a rank, and a country, and for a moment in naval history, that was enough. As a landsman, Brown enjoyed the worst of it. Manual labor, long shifts, no privacy, and below deck, hammocks were packed tight, and punishment came quick. But still, William worked, slept, ate, survived storms and inspections, not just side by side with British sailors, but as one of them. And then one day, William was discharged. But why? You see, the officers found no contraband, no crime, but something about Brown didn't quite fit the Navy's rulebook. And by 1815, it was logged, discharged, being a female. And had served aboard Queen Charlotte for several weeks, possibly months. No trial, no scandal, just a quiet removal from the records. William Brown's birth name, never recorded, and there was no further trace. But in the 1800s, when only men were allowed on warships, an unexpected black sailor boarded one and held the line. Who William Brown really was, we may never know. Follow Dydon watching passively. We decode the myth and we don't clap for crumbs. This man single-handedly built the biggest black publishing network in Europe and then disappeared from history. So it's late 1950s and a teenager steps off the boat from Guyana and the London air is cold, unwelcoming. But he has this special love for stories, so he goes and explores bookshop after bookshop and finds nothing. No Caribbean writers, no news from home, no voices like his. So whilst training to be a dental technician, he starts saving up. He sells West Indian records from home, posts Caribbean newspapers through letterboxes, and builds himself a customer list. And when demand grows, he opens himself up a shop. And my man started small, but he had a big impact. Jamaican papers, Trinidadian novels, Guyanese pamphlets, and people were queuing up outside just to feel seen. Then he starts publishing cookbooks, poems, school books, and a magazine called Flame. And by the 80s, hundreds of titles. And if you were black in Britain, your first book probably came through him. So if he published so many books and built such a great empire, what happened to him? You see, when stories weren't there, he made them. And when no one printed them, he did. But then the money dried up. Big publishers caught on and his reach faded. The shop shut, the press closed, no archives, no mention, no tribute. And that's how history forgets you, unless we remember him now. His name, Arif Ali, the man who built Britain's biggest black publishing empire, right from his front room in Finsbury Park. Follow Dydon watching passively, we decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs. By day, she lit up Paris cabarets, and by night, she was smuggling coded messages past Nazis. The year is 1940, Paris has fallen and Nazi officers are everywhere. Paris needed eyes, ears, and nerve, and somehow the most unlikely person stepped up. She didn't carry a weapon, she didn't wear a badge, she actually wore silk. And when she walked into a room, people stared, but never too close. And that's what made her perfect. Because while generals were being followed and soldiers were being searched, she was being applauded. She writes messages in her hands and arms and covers them with gloves. She conceals documents in her corset, all whilst dancing through borders and singing her way past checkpoints. And while they were clapping, she was mapping their troops' movements. One day she gets invited to a party packed with Nazi officers, but if they find out what she's doing, she'll get unalived on the spot. So before she gets on stage, she memorizes key Nazi airfield locations in Western France, hits some intel in invisible ink between the bars of her sheet music. My girl gets on stage, dazzles the audience with her voice, and slips it to a British agent mid-performance before continuing like nothing happened. And it worked. The Allies used her intel to bomb German positions. She weren't just performing, she was changing the outcome of the war. Her name, Josephine Baker, a world-famous entertainer and the most glamorous spy to ever outsmart the Nazis. She didn't just survive history, she helped win it. Follow Dydon watching passively, we decode the myth and we don't clap for crumbs. Does pride make you uncomfortable? Well, what if I told you that was kind of the point? So it's 1969, New York, and there was this one dingy little bar on the corner of Christopher Street. It had no sign on the doors, cash only, and no dancing allowed. But if you were queer in New York, it was a place you could breathe. Men in wigs, women in suits, kids that had been kicked out of their home and finally had somewhere to go. And behind the bar, a mafia payoff that kept the police raids real quiet. Well, most nights, not that night. That night, they came in swinging, dragging men by the hair, pushing women against the walls. But then a shift. A woman resists, a bottle breaks, someone yells and then another, and then suddenly the street is full and nobody's scared anymore. So how did a hidden bar on a side street turn into a global rebellion? You see, that one night turned into 6. Fists, fire, fury, and people who had never been seen before were now making headlines. And a year later, they marched. No floats, no brands, just fury and pride. They weren't asking for acceptance, they were taking up space. The bar, Stonewall. The people who stood their ground, black, brown, trans, femme, loud. The ones who history tried to forget. And that's what pride is. The more resistance, the more need. Follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth. We don't clap for crumbs. Why are Britons still up in Middle Eastern politics? Because they never left. So in the early 1900s, this territory was part of the Ottoman Empire, and the people there mostly comprised of Arabic-speaking Muslims, then Christians, and then Jews. And at this point, this wasn't a battlefield, this was just home. But then came World War I. Britain was fighting Germany and the Ottomans. That's modern-day Turkey. They were back in Germany, and maybe you can see where this is going. So Britain made it their mission to break Ottoman control in the Middle East, a simple divide and conquer. They told Arab leaders that they will give them independence if they rebelled against the Turks, the Ottoman rulers. So at the same time, Britain and France had a secret deal to divide the Ottoman land between themselves. So when the Arab leaders were fighting for Britain, Britain was going to take over the land anyway. So the question now is, how and why did they end up giving it over to somebody else? So in 1917, Britain issued a Balfour Declaration, which is supporting the national home for Jewish people in the same territory. Why? Because they thought that European Jews would support their war efforts, or at least stay neutral if they backed Zionist ambitions. So after the war, Britain took full control, called it a British mandate, and Jewish immigration rose, and so did Passa Passa. The Arabs and the Zionists clashed, and by the 1940s, Britain was like, no, I'm not ready, and said that they wanted out. It was too much violence and pressure. Can you imagine? They start the thing and now they want out. In 1947, the United Nations, mostly Western powers like US, UK, France, voted to partition the land between two. One for the Arabs, one for the Jewish. And the Zionist leaderships were like, yeah, sure. But the Arabs were like, no, this ain't what we talked about. And Britain, a year later, pulled out, and then war broke out. So this wasn't ancient, it was war strategy, secret deals and foreign power. Follow if you're done watching passively. We decode the myth, and we don't clap for crumbs.